I think we're very nervous about believing that we actually have correct moral claims at all. Like, I think people are afraid to say, no, it's actually just wrong to do those particular things no matter what species you are.
Philosophers in space.
Welcome back to Philosophers in Space. My name is Callie Wright, joined by Chief Ethics Officer Aaron Rabinowitz. How's it going, Aaron?
Oh, jumping the gun, Captain. A little early on the questions. We gotta set things up here before you start asking some questions.
I got excited, and you need to just let me live my life.
It's just all Q's, no A's. No, it's fine. I understand. It's your first Q&A. You're chomping at that bit. It's okay. By the end of this, you're going to be grizzled.
As the new co-host, I feel like I get the first pick at asking questions, right? Like I get the highest priority. So if I want to ask a question, I feel like it's not a lot to just be like, "Hey, Aaron, how you doing?" Maybe because I'm worried about my friend, but I guess that doesn't matter.
Okay. I see. We're going to be passive aggressive about this now. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
No. I think we've done enough episodes that the conflict can come out now. It can be on air. That's fine.
Yeah. We can. There'll be tweet threads after the episode comes out.
I'm going to subtweet.
Yeah,
I'm subtweeting you right now. I'm just over here just doing it. Recording that I am doing right now. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our first Callie-infused listener cues. Super excited.
Callie-infused. We have to make that a phrase for something.
Yeah, everybody needs a good Callie injection. So we're gonna do some questions. For folks who are not familiar, this is a way for us to thank all of our patrons. So we're gonna go through, 30 or so names per question, brought to you by Kind of Idea. Before we get to that, though, we need to divert a little attention away because we are doing a Pylon pledge drive. We are trying to get a few more patrons so that we can continue to sort of grow the show in various kinds of ways. Hopefully by now you've already heard Callie's sick promo. But just to clarify everything that's going on, we sent out a survey a little while ago. Hopefully you saw that. A lot of y'all did because we got twice as many responses as we had even hoped to expect to get in our wildest dreams. We had 99 responses. They were full of helpful and sometimes contradictory suggestions, and we're going to try to implement as many of those as logically possible.
Especially the contradictory ones. We're definitely going to implement the contradictory ones.
We're going to do as many incoherent, inconsistent things as we can. Now, first, before I talk about some changes and what we are offering, I wanted to share a little bit of the highlights from those surveys because they were a lot of fun. Of the, again, 99 responses, absurd amount. Usually, from what I can tell, the response rate for a survey like this would be somewhere, if you're lucky, in the 5 to 10% range, which either means that we have a solid listenership or a very passionate base. And either way, I'm happy. That seems like a win-win to me. Of the 99 people surveyed, we found that 40% have been listening for more than a year, and that another 40% had been listening from the start of the show, which again, completely mind-boggling. Obviously, with a survey like this, you're going to have some selection bias. Your diehard fans are going to be the ones who respond more, but it's still really wild that so many people have dug the show for so long through its ups and downs, and that y'all have stuck with it and want to help us continue to shape it in these ways. Another really surprising result was that 2/3 of respondents have studied philosophy, which was actually a lot more than I expected. And 40% had studied it in a classroom, which is way more than I expected, which I think is good news just for everybody. Again, some selection bias there, but I think it's nice to hear. Also, I wanted to share a couple of the juicier pull quotes, and of course there were way too many fun quotes for us to share all of them, but just a few things, such as, for our your favorite parts, we asked you said things like, the deconstruction of tropes and the relation of those to philosophical movements and frameworks, the luck-pilling part, when the hosts have opposite intuitions, and when Aaron asks questions that feel a bit like micro versions of the torture at the end of Embrace the Void, And the last one was, believe it or not, the exposition zone. I really love hearing how other people experience a story. It's usually so wildly divergent from how I did, and I love that. Which is, I think, interesting because I think we all sort of assume that the exposition zone's purpose is just to, like, tell people the basic plot, but it is cool to kind of see that. Speaking of the exposition zone, no part of the show received more contradictory comments than the exposition zone. Some people wanted more, some people wanted less, some wanted none. It was all over the map, so we're going to do the best we can, as you do with survey responses. We're going to continue to try to fine-tune that space so that it doesn't overrun the philosophy. And to that end, right, in the kind of fix the exposition zone idea, that's why we are hoping to extend the show. We figured that by extending it, that'll make extra room for the philosophy without having to shortchange our favorite moments. The other complaint we got the most was, besides fix the exposition zone, was I miss After Dark. I had to cut Patreon because of financial issues. There were so many versions of this, and we are totally sympathetic. Things are not great out there in the world. This is, something that people enjoy, but it can't be a priority over your basic necessities, and that's totally understandable. So to that end, we have tried to revamp our Patreon tiers some. We are opening back up a $2 tier for patrons, and that will give you early access and After Dark. So that'll mean for, $24 a year, pretty low, you can have the entire episode, which hopefully will make it feel like, people are part of the community, they're contributing, they are hearing the full thing. If you are still unable to join even at that level, but really desperately want the After Dark content, email us at Philosophers in Space and we'll give you access. Like, we want you to enjoy the show more than that, but we hope that people can join in so that we can see our community grow in that way. Then at the $5 a month, patrons will still get NASA as usual. For $10, those who've languished with no unique Patreon benefits for far too long, we are setting a Patreon goal, which we'll talk about in a second, to have Space Puppy Hangout sessions.
I'm so excited about this.
Yeah, so this will be where patrons can hang out on Zoom with Voltaire and Wedge, and I guess Callie and I will also be there, not that it matters. Everybody wants to form a parasocial relationship with a puppy, and we are here to support that habit. At $25, patrons will still get their shout-out every episode, and at $50, patrons will get shout-outs, plus we will do our best to accommodate content requests. At $75, we are now offering a chance to come and hang out with us on NASA, where we will roast the thing you love and or hate. We don't care either way. Finally, just for funsies, we're opening up a 100-level godlike being tier of some sort, where we have nothing to offer you, but we are happy to entertain requests. We'll do our best to get you a starship if we can. Hopefully, this will give folks a good range of options. Everyone will feel, thanked. We'll feel supporting, all the good things. And as for the goals, hopefully you already heard, we are currently at 317 patrons, I wish, which is, again, amazing for a show our size, percentage-wise. But we do think there's also room to grow, so we are going to try to get back to our peak, which was 330 patrons, at which point we will extend the show to a full 2 hours, including the After Dark. And then we will, at 350 patrons, which I still think seems very doable, we will open up our Space Puppy Hangout sessions for $10 patrons. At 375 patrons, it's merch time. And we will start making some Philosophers in Space merch, which is long overdue, and I think will be lots of fun material there. We're going to try to get our boy Neil to do some artwork for us. And then, if we can, our stretch goal... And
I'll just say real quick,
yeah.
The merch thing, any project that I'm involved with will never have a generic, here's just text with the show. I really don't like it when podcasts or shows or whatever have merch like that. It'll be merch that's cool even if you don't know what the show is. That's a commitment that I'm making to you, the listener.
It's a good goal. It's a good commitment, right? We are going to help you be cool by having Philosophers in Space merch, because that's what coolness is.
Be the envy of all your friends.
Exactly. Right. So, and then at our stretch goal, 400 patrons, we will do something that several of our diehard long-term patrons have been desperately pleading for. We will make Callie read Anathem, which is the Neil Stevenson book. I actually don't think it's going to be that bad. Callie's got a significant kink for world building, so they might actually make it through, that architecture porn for the first 100 pages. If you are not a patron yet, please consider joining us. If you're already a patron, see if you can trick some friends into becoming patrons. And in the end of it, we can make Callie learn about hem space, and that'll be a lot of fun. Okay, end of pitch. Let's thank some patrons.
Let's thank some patrons. And I'll just say for my part, it was actually really cool and humbling to see all of the response stuff. Like, I knew that I was joining a show that had a very cool community, cool show. People care about it, but I was surprised at people are really, really into this show and what we're doing, and it's humbling to step into that. It's a little intimidating. I don't want to let people down, but ultimately, I'm just legitimately, all joking aside, very, very excited about the cool stuff that we're gonna make. So, with that being said, shout out to Hidden Fish, Nick, Brian Bodie, Phoebe, Sarah Garcia Cespedes, Emperor Bulborb, Jared Landon, Deus Celo, Apostate Apotheosis, Veronica in the Well, Who Am I, Maxwell Ain, Adam Freewin, Mike Demoulin, There Is No Spoon, Alex Antkowiak, Quinn Ballas, Waiting for Godot, Daniel Allen, Citizen 42, Sydney Apted, Ethan Mills, Adrian Maniatis, Kill Jeff Bezos.
Just reading that, not advice.
Yeah, not advice. Graduating from table chair to burger sandwich, Rochelle, Zevi Pardes, Morgan Weeks, and Axizard X.
I'm so glad to have somebody else on the show who reads half the names like they are questions. That makes me feel so much better in so many ways. Okay.
That's just my subtle signaling that I'm just like, hey, I see you, and I'm aware I might be doing this wrong, and I just need you to know that. And if that's true, I feel bad, and I'm very sorry.
I'm glad to feel someone else feeling like they're letting people down, so it's not just me feeling like I'm letting people down. It's great.
We make great partners for several reasons.
First question brought to you by those patrons. Kroll the Swollbold asks, what philosophical subject do you look forward to covering the most? So, nice wide open generic starter here.
Yeah. This is going to sound like a cop-out. I promise it's not. But for me, it's not even so much that there's one philosophical topic that I'm really excited about. For me, it's more about making the real world practical connections between sort of high-minded philosophical ideas and how it actually affects the way that we move through the world. And this is a conversation that I end up having a lot when I'm talking about anything remotely related to philosophy. I'm the one who always brings it back down to, how does this help people get fed? How does this help people lead better lives? How does this get people health care? All of that sort of stuff. And I think I had a bad enough experience early on with people who were really into philosophy that it kind of soured me that it's oh, these people don't actually give a shit about that. It's just a philosophical exercise where, people can work on feeding their egos and feel smarter and better than everyone else. It's all conceptual. And so few of these people are interested in how this actually affects the way people live their lives. But I also know that was a shortcoming of my exposure to the field. And so for me, it's about sort of taking all of these things that I'm probably conceptually aware of, but don't know the names for, and don't know the histories for, and don't know all of the thinking that's been done, and connecting all of those dots together. For me, I think that's the most satisfying thing. Is there's oh, there's this thing that's been rolling around in my head forever, and then finding out there's a dozen books about this thing, and people have been thinking about this long before me. Like, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I originated any of these questions, but it's just like I hadn't been exposed to the information that made those connections yet. And so for me, that's the thing. A couple of times throughout the episodes that we're recording, I would say something and Aaron would be like, "Oh yeah, that's the question this philosopher asks a lot," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right. There's another thing that I learned that I had no idea about before." So kind of like learning the depths of my ignorance and putting those things together, I think is the thing for me.
Yes, we all come to accept the truth of the Lorites from an anathem, which is what any thought that I've had, somebody's already had before me. It's a humbling reality that we all accept. I think that actually highlights something that I think makes part of why we gel so well in our discussions is that I am not the kind of philosopher that you don't want to be around, which is to say I also had the same trouble of, like, there are philosophers I've met who will very proudly talk about a field without learning about a field, and they think that that's a feature, not a bug. They think that that's sort of a kind of pure approach to something rather than an applied approach. And as an applied ethicist, I have at various points gotten shade that applied ethics is not, it's not serious philosophy. It's not logic. It's not epistemology. It's basically sociology at that point. So I'm very sympathetic to that. But I also, I teach my ethics as the point of ethics is to improve people's quality of life. You start on the streets and you end in the streets, right? So I think I totally agree with you that it is fun to do philosophical hypotheticals sometimes just to play around, but the ultimate goal, right, the real purpose is to help people. So I think, and I don't know if we managed to do that or not on this show, but I think hopefully we at least convey that, when I talk about free will or something, I talk about it because I think it has really significant implications, not just to screw around.
Yeah. Well, you remember when the first time you called me to talk about coming on the show, that was the very first thing that I said is that, I'm just so skeptical of this whole enterprise where we just talk about concepts a whole bunch and never actually put our feet on the pavement and apply them. And you're like, "Oh yeah, me too." And I was like, "Great, then I'm in."
Great.
That was the one hang up that I had.
Yeah, and a lot of folks in the surveys said that what part of what they really enjoy about the show is that we do make the stuff concrete in that sense. We make it accessible, and I think for me, accessibility isn't just about downshifting terminology, though that is really important, or not referencing philosopher names too much because that doesn't help most anybody, but also the this matters because here's where you see in the real world people, doing this poorly and the harmful consequences of that.
Well, I think the specific way that it's presented matters a lot too, because if you listen to the intro show, I talked a little bit about Star Trek being the introduction to me of taking real world lessons from fictional stories from the media that we consume. And, I learned a lot about ethics and morality from watching Star Trek. And Aaron and I have been talking a lot about things that we can do to streamline the show, make it cooler, whatever. And something that popped into my head at one point is people are asking for more philosophy. Do we even need to do the let's talk about a sci-fi thing and work out the plot? Why wouldn't we just talk about philosophy? My immediate thought was that these stories are the vehicles for me to get into that because it helps spark my imagination and imagine all of these scenarios and how it applies back to everyday life. And I'm sure there's some deep psychology that explains that, but I think the media that we consume, and especially sci-fi, I think is a really important entry point into that because you can imagine so many different things that it wouldn't be possible in the universe that we live in, but it still brings up really important questions that can relate back to how we deal with things in the future. And I was like, yeah, that's a silly idea. Why would we get rid of that at all? Because not only is it fun to, dig into sci-fi stuff, but I do think that the framing of that matters and the way that it makes it accessible to people really matters. And I think that's the other thing that excites me more than just let's talk about a philosophical concept. Let's talk about it as introduced to us through Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever.
Philosophy with better special effects, for sure. All right.
Yes.
Let us press on. I will read some names. Thank you to That Rich McGee, What a Thirst Trap for Guys Like Me, Einar Strandberg, Joseph Wilfred John Fitzpatrick III, barrister and solicitor, Derek, I escaped hellscapes of Russia to continue giving you my money, Fake Chuck, Anna, Squishy Bish, you can just think of me as that one guy, Adra Pansa, Prospective Penguin, Andrew Schul, Ghoul, those are two separate names, Fred Stokes, Peter Udstun, Joel, Roslyn Walker, Gabby Gabs Gabster, Rambo Billy, McKenna, Bob the Barbarian, Dole Wenatunul. You can back me up. That's just what it looks like. John C. Optimus Prime, Hero, 3 blue, red, white, legendary artifact, creature, robot, more than meets the eye, 2 blue, white. That's good. Fine, you win. Take my money. Fair. Osmium, Babelfish, John Williams, Sibelian, and Kevin the Barbarian. We get a lot of barbarian classes, I feel like. Heavy barbarian chaos dragon vibe here.
All right, so next question. We scared Thomas away with terrible movies. Where do you each fall on the optimistic/pessimistic spectrum about the long-term outcomes of humans, society/conscious beings in general? Well, let's get right to it, shall we?
We like to start basic,
Yeah.
easy stuff.
Aaron, what do you think?
So this is a tricky question for me because in my sense, optimists and pessimists are like relative terms. It seems to me like you'd be like there's some average of pessimism versus optimism in the culture, and like where you are has to be relational to that. Like there's no absolute, I feel like, kind of measurement. And even by that, I don't really know the answer. Like sometimes I feel very optimistic and other times I feel incredibly pessimistic. I would guess it's probably more pessimistic a lot of the time because I feel like we're just not the kind of creatures that are built to address issues like climate change. And I'm worried about the destabilizing effects of climate change on society and the suffering that will cause. And that like we sort of have hit a weird crisis of meaning that we're struggling to move past. Stuff like that, I think, really worries me. And then I guess I'm optimistic when I start to make up a bunch of stuff about the utopia that I think we should bring about with luck and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
For me, I think it's important to define what we mean, one, by like optimistic/pessimistic, but I think even
You're
defining
a
what
already.
we mean, but I know, right? And this is why this makes sense for me to be here, because whenever I hear stuff like that, I always just think like, well, what do we mean when we ask questions like that, right?
That's why philosophers can't do surveys.
Like, right. So like, am I optimistic that humans as a species will still exist in 1,000 years? I think I probably fall on the yes side of that. I think humans as a species in some form or another will probably exist in 1,000 years. But whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic or not, also like we have to talk about like, will those people be leading lives that provide what people need, or will it just be people eking out a living in some like future horrible dystopia? It's hard because I do think, at least in the history of Earth as we know it, our problem-solving ability as humans is kind of unprecedented. But I also think that it's very, very arrogant to think that we are immune to an extinction level event that would wipe out humanity as a species, or even like our ability to keep communities and societies together as we understand them now, So like, I think there is a good chance that, our problem solving ability gets some number of us through whatever, climate catastrophe happens. I think that, like, I don't know that that is an optimistic thing to say, because I also think it's pretty evident that without some mass societal change, it's just going to be the absolute most rich people and whoever they can pay to solve those problems. And so like I'm probably not one of those people myself. And so like I don't know that I survive that future, but I think humanity as a species probably does.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think our history thus far, important to point out, it's a relatively short history, but that often when we are faced with those kinds of big problems, if we decide to focus our time and attention on solving them, we are generally capable of doing that. And I think at some point it will probably become undeniable, for example, for anyone to acknowledge that like climate change is irreversibly altering the earth as a habitat for humanity, right? I think at our worst, we're probably not capable of destroying the earth as a habitat for some kind of life. I think even if we wiped all ourselves out, some life would survive and, evolve anew, whatever. I don't think that we're powerful enough to, in most scenarios, destroy like every living thing on the planet. But, the question is can we save the earth as a place for human beings to build lives and have the social connections that we need, whatever sort of meaning that we seek? Like, is that a thing we're going to be able to do? And that is a much bigger question mark for me. I think we are absolutely capable of it. So maybe that's the optimistic side of me. Like, I think there is absolutely a possible world where that happens. I think it's a very, very steep hill to climb to get there. And maybe the odds are not exactly in our favor, but I don't think it's impossible. And so, it's kind of a mixed bag for me. I think history has shown us that the kind of fundamental transformational change that we need really only comes when we're faced with some kind of existential threat. But I also think that's a cultural failing. I don't know that that's a failing of our species. And so, like, I don't think that's inherent to humanity. I think that's, like, if we do enough of a, like, values and cultural exchange, we can teach people the values that lead society in that direction. It's hard, but I think it's possible. So yeah, I don't know. That's not a very neat answer to that question, but I think it's probably the most like honest distillation of the way that I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a good point to distinguish between, good outcomes for humans versus society writ large versus conscious beings writ larger. Like, things might go very poorly for most of the conscious beings on this planet that aren't humans, while humans would potentially still survive. I agree with you that like humans are likely to survive because we're adaptation machines, and that's kind of what we do. I think one way to approach this question is the like Fermi paradox question of like, why haven't we encountered any other species? Are there these kind of bottlenecks that all species get hung up on? I tend to be pretty pessimistic on that kind of question. And so like, if you were to ask me, are humans going to colonize space? I would say no. Like, maybe we will send semi-sentient drones into space or something like that, but our fleshy meat selves are not going up there anytime ever, I don't think, for in large groups. But like, the technology might change, things might be different, who knows? But I do think that there's reason to be pessimistic that like we could be this sort of, that like living beings are the sorts of things that evolve in scarcity and behave based on scarcity and return to scarcity inevitably because of their behavior. And
I think a lot about the way that society is organized and who it's organized for. And I think about this quote, the person who told this story, I forget their name and I feel bad for that. But somebody was asking a question about like what you find as an anthropologist that determines like some significant level of development. And somebody said that it was like finding a skeleton that had a healed femur bone, because that meant that the society had decided that there was value in helping someone who was not capable of being like physically moving. So like, obviously if like your femur's broken, you're not going to be able to contribute to the hunt. You're not going to be able to farm. You're not going to be able to do much. but that the evidence was such that they could tell this person was taken care of by someone with some level of medical knowledge. And that says something that as a society, we recognize that someone's value is more than their direct ability to contribute in a physical way, to like the most direct means of survival. And so I think like, okay, in my worst case scenario, could I ever be happy leading a sort of maybe like hunter-gatherer type lifestyle, for example? I probably could, but that also is partly because like I play roller derby. I'm pretty athletic. I'm in decent physical condition. I'm pretty strong. Obviously, I could get injured and that would go away completely. And like, what's my value in a society like that? And right now, we live in a society that is so obsessed with what people can contribute in a way of like, generating capital, generating wealth, or protecting wealth, that once you're not capable of doing that, i.e. you're disabled in some way, then your value as a person is just removed. And I think I worry especially for folks like that, because I could show up and be like, yeah, I got a strong pair of legs, I got strong arms, I can contribute, so like, let's go. But I worry for myself in that like that's by no means a permanent state of affairs, and then I worry for all of the people who can't, who are not physically able to do things like that in a society like that. Like that would have to be a deliberate values judgment where we would say like, no, these folks still belong and these folks still matter too. And I don't know that I have a ton of faith that in our current cultural context, that's a thing that would happen.
Yeah, there's some interesting evidence that like even in scarcity situations, humans tend to be compassionate. But
right.
Well, we should save that. That's a whole nature question for us to unpack. I don't know if on its own episode. I think it's time for a few more names.
Yeah, let's go. So shout out to Michael Cullen, Just John, Xylem Graph, Brian, support co-ops and not-for-profits, and support co-ops and not-for-profits, and not for profits.
Oh, yeah. Ambiguous.
Sean, Thomas Freeman, Ray, Ultima Ratio, Regum 82, Aaron A. Aardvark, Kate Stone, Baldwise, Volvos Are Awesome, Slammo, Printpile.com, Angela Sarto, Tua Tagovailoa, Fix the Vote, Stephen Luttrell, Salt Prairie Photography, Vignesh Sivakumar, Angry Moeller podcast sponsored by Bob the Lomi, Austin and Verba, unpronounceable Polish volcano, name redacted for personal privacy. If I'm not a clone, then what's this 3 on my forehead? Mr. Inaudible, Mr. Rye, Mary Basu, and Jake. Just Jake. I respect first name. That's what I respect, that energy.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if Aaron A. Aardvark was trying to, like, assuming we were going to go alphabetically or something like that, or just making fun of me. Either way, both good.
I support either of those goals, to be clear.
Right. Next question. Brought to us by Guillotine Chan is hungry for justices. Ooh. It is a question that we have addressed before with Thomas and Aaron, but I'd be interested in Callie's opinion. Is the Prime Directive ultimately moral, immoral, or neither? Time to get canceled.
Time to have several tweet threads written about me. The Prime Directive, as written and executed in the Star Trek universe, I think is immoral. Not a fan.
Correct. Agreed. Objectively so.
Like, they are absolutely trying to solve a problem that exists and a problem that should be thought about, in that, any interference with another society can come with unforeseen consequences that could ultimately lead to like really bad things for that society. And so you have to be really, really careful about how you interact with those societies. The most obvious example that I can think about is in the J.J. Abrams movies, where at the beginning they're like trying to save this group of people that's going to be destroyed by a volcano erupting. Like, in theory, they can save those folks without those folks ever having known this was a thing, right? And so if you come up like, wow, I see 1,000 people here that are about to be just utterly wiped out by a natural disaster. I can press a couple of buttons and make it not happen. The idea that that would be prohibited, don't feel great about that. Again,
Right.
I get the wrestling with, you know, let nature take its course, which is like there's a whole uncomfortable bit of stuff that comes with that, because especially because their dividing line is simply whether or not a society has achieved warp travel or not. I get that you got to pick a line, just like it's not like the day you turn 18, suddenly you're more able than yesterday to make a great decision about smoking cigarettes or voting or joining the military or whatever. But for the sake of having rules, you have to figure out where the line is. So like, I respect that. I get that. But one, where that line is applied and how it's applied, I think are both really, really problematic in the way that they play out in the Star Trek universe, especially given that the Star Trek universe is kind of internally inconsistent. I'm thinking immediately of the Barzan wormhole. I forget the name of the TNG episode, but the reason the Barzans are auctioning off the rights to use this wormhole is because they just straight up don't have space travel, let alone warp drive. But somehow they're here on the Enterprise trying to sell off the rights to this wormhole for people to use. So that's a fun bit of internal inconsistency. But yeah, I think almost universally, if I thought about it, maybe I could come up with an exception. But I think most of the time on screen, when you see a Starfleet captain be like, no, like we're ignoring the Prime Directive on this one, I'm like, yes, that was the correct decision. That was absolutely a thing you should have done.
Yeah, I think it's good that you bring up the sort of what we in philosophy would call a problem of the heaps or a Sorites paradox, where it's like, where's the line that you draw between when something is Nazi enough that you're going to invade the country versus, Rwanda enough that you're
Right.
not.
Right.
And I always thought that like Eddie Izzard does the best job in terms of making fun of that at scale, which is the like, oh, you killed someone else's people. Well, that was a mistake. And you see that, you mostly see that, right? Where it's like, oh, the Romulans, they're starting to kill other people. Now we gotta worry. The Cardassians are, murdering a few too many Bajorians. Maybe let's get involved or something. So I think it is this kind of liberalism at scale problem where it's, we see that colonialism was bad, so we don't want to do a colonialism, but instead we end up doing this like cultural relativism thing that seems to go too far in the other direction. I also, I think we're very nervous about believing that we actually have correct moral claims at all. Like, I think people are afraid to say, no, it's actually just wrong to do those particular things no matter what species you are. But I think we
Which
should
I
be.
hate because, like, that's a good hesitation to have. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to make sure you vetted that thoroughly.
I think it's just like we think that we can never vet it thoroughly enough, and so we avoid ever doing anything. It seems like that's the feeling that I get. But like if like Ogden Steers is going to get put to death, I'm sorry, I'm gonna invade your planet. I just don't care. Like, I'm just going to stop you.
Yeah, and I mean that's the problem, because I think we can create a million different scenarios where it's like, yeah, this is obviously a bad idea. Like, we should not drop a hand phaser into the middle of like what we would think of as like a Bronze Age civilization. Definitely a bad idea. We should probably not do that, right? Mm-hmm. And on the other side, we could think of a lot of scenarios where it's like, hit a couple of buttons, some blue stuff comes out of the ship, the volcano doesn't erupt, these people don't die, and they literally never know that any of that happened. And I feel like that's probably a good thing to do if you run into it and you have the capacity to do. Probably makes sense.
You get that in one of the Abrams movies, right? Where they're like trying to set it off without getting involved, and they get involved.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the example that I brought up and that's like the whole conflict. They're like, well, this obviously breaks the Prime Directive. And if I remember right, Chris Pine as Kirk very correctly was like, okay, but yeah, that's silly. We're just going to do this anyways.
Right. There's maybe a sense of like another concern is people being overcommitted. Like there's just too many bad things in the world that you have to address, and you start being the policeman of the universe or something like that. But like if you're a post-scarcity society, like I feel like even in the culture series, the supercomputers seem to acknowledge they have some obligation to get involved at some level. They just do it in a very obscured kind of way.
There is something to that. Obviously, if you're trying to explore all of, like, you don't want to go around trying to find like every species that's oppressed so you can fix it, because that's all you would ever do, and you would never have your own thing. But the example I'm thinking of in the Star Trek universe is like the Bajoran occupation, right? Like you hear Jean-Luc Picard being like, well, we were saddened by those events, but they happened inside the designated borders of the Cardassian Empire, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay,
Right.
but like, a genocide is happening, and it's happening kind of in your backyard. So like, if nothing else, you could like send over some food to some people who were suffering. I mean, they did
Right.
decide to give blankets to the Bajoran refugees that were on that planet that they
very nice
find
of
in trying to find that terrorist. So it's like they absolutely do get involved sometimes, and it's bad.
I think you highlight a really interesting problem, which is the Federation are both scientists and military, and you really can't
Yes.
be an anthropologist and a soldier at the same time. They have
Right.
directly opposite goals, right? The anthropologist is there not to interfere and to listen and learn in a way that, like, if you're going to do politics, it's a different job. So they
Entirely,
really do need
yes.
to divide these things up. I agree. All right, we got 2 more questions to get through and not enough time to do them, so let's roll through this. All right, thanks to the testimony of Mushroom, Daniel Kerr, Jess Benning, Quilty is charged, Thomas corrupted me into buying a quarter pounder, and I'm so mad with cheese, the collaborators party, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Land Shark, support basic science research. If you're old enough to recognize that joke, you're as old as I am. Congratulations. Ian Gample, sorry. Okay, forgot Seattle. I'll fly to Sacramento. We got to do this live show before Scombert arrives, or it'll be 2024. Kaldran, Craig Coraggio, Jason King. There are 4 lights. Alexis Olson, Grant Webster, full name, join your labor union, together we bargain, alone we beg, Erica Pullen, Rowan Willis, Josh Brandon, Ian from Wine Country, who I got to hang out with at QED, Jason Wright, Maria Jade, Paul, former internet spaceship politician, general contact unit problem child, Dizes Ma, an outrage tort is an anger cake, and Tom Harris. And look at this, you win a DVD special bonus award. This is something you might not be familiar with. We always try to have, if possible, a name get called and then a question from that person. That's the ultimate goal. And we are getting it here, obviously, from our all-star name question asker, general contact unit problem child. Would you like to read the question?
Absolutely. General Contact Unit Problem Child asks, are you morally obligated to love your children? Is it enough to provide them with food and board out of a sense of duty to one's offspring, or is that not enough? Basically, are you morally obligated to love your kids or give them up? Aaron, I'm going to let you get canceled for this one first. But
I think you should always follow the prime directive with children. Never help them. Hey, until they figure out warp, leave them be, right?
That's true. That's true.
Paternalism is bad. No, what do I think? There's an interesting question about what your goal in morality is. Is it to harness your emotional capacity for compassion or love or something like that? Or is it to, harness your rational capacity to be consistent and force you on the basis of consistency to act ethically? I tend to think it's good to cultivate as much compassion as you can for as many people. I think love, though, if we're really asking love, I don't think you can choose who you love. And I don't, I don't think you have a moral obligation there, except insofar as we are all trying to cultivate universal love. I do think, you can have an obligation to take care of your children, just like you have an obligation to take care of other people's children. And if you believe in kind of care ethics, then you could argue that you have a unique relationship to your own children. I'm fine with that. I don't think, though, that even like broadly speaking, I don't think that I can ask people to love their abusers, for example. I think that is a super derogatory request. And if your children are abusers, which happens sometimes, then you're not obligated to love them. Maybe obligated to do right by them the same as you would by other people, but that might involve also not sticking, like cutting them off at some point or something like that. So, I think our obligation is more complicated than just a feeling of love and the sort of care that comes with that.
I am always very hesitant to ascribe like a need or a moral obligation to another person, for another person, if that makes sense. Like, I feel very comfortable, like thinking about and setting out what I think my obligation is to another person, right? So like, people in my closest friend circle, my family, whatever, like I know the lengths to which I would and wouldn't go for those people. And I feel very comfortable making those calls based on like the level at which I care about them, my capacity to take care of them, how much money in theory I could maybe give them if they were down on a hard time, how much money I have to give, how much strength I have to give, how much time, all that sort of stuff. But when I'm talking about like what another person's obligation is to another person, I'm just like always going to be hedging and finding things where it like wouldn't make sense that the answer would be no. And so, and this is another just deeply
You're just
philosophical
falling back on
thing.
the prime directive here. Is that why?
Maybe. So my first question is, of course, well, what do you mean by love? Because I feel very confident, like you said, in saying that like if you are responsible for the creation of this fully formed child life, to be clear, this is not like the abortion, like you made a fetus and it's a person immediately argument. But like this is a fully formed child, human being out in the world, and you helped make that. I think I am more comfortable saying that you have a higher moral obligation to that person than you do to any random person that you run into on the street. We can talk about the different kinds of love. We can talk about love as a verb versus a noun, which is, I know, like a very silly, like Instagram influencer thing, but I think it is actually true that you can love on someone in like a verb way, even if you don't necessarily feel that. Like, I can take care of someone and provide them with love, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person has the same emotional context for me as like my mom, for example. And I think loving on someone in terms of like making sure their needs are met, I think there is a moral obligation to do that. I don't think that is a moral obligation to like what's going on in your heart or in your head, but I think that is a moral obligation to like what that means for how you treat that person, or how you navigate your ultimate responsibility for like this life that you are responsible for creating. And obviously taking care of basic needs is one thing. I do think that taking care of basic needs also includes emotional needs. Like, I don't think it's enough to be like, you got dinner, you got a roof, you got a place to go to the bathroom. After that, I'm done. Right. Like, I don't think, especially a child's basic needs ends there. Like a child also has like emotional and psychological needs. And I do think that unless you have provided for some other way for those needs to be met, I do think that as a parent, you have a moral obligation to do your best to provide those things. That doesn't mean you're a crappy person if you fail at it, because I think every parent fails at that at some point. Like, every person fails that to another person at some point in their life. But I think as your framework for like how to interact with this life that you helped create, I do think there is an obligation there.
Fair enough. All right. We got 4 minutes and one question left. We can do this.
Let's go. All right.
I believe in you.
Real Power, Skeptical Wonder, Elon the Dangerous, Yesh Medicinebird, Jesse Ciprell, Colbin Airdall, Rain, the Kazon were far better nemesis for Voyager than the Borg, correct take, Nicholas Stark, Westerberg, a karaoke legend who likes to sit on tables because, okay, Mo Perry, Alex Arnett, Redacted the Courts, Ratho, Michael Marenko, Michael, Difference, Inference, Reference, John Schmidt, Roberta C. Churchill, Mouthstache, Judith Bichara, Corey Ebert, Gwenther, Chekhov's Butt Plug Award, Savannah to 9, Cowbell, James Pittman, Baphomet's best buddy besides Beelzebub, collecting samples for a non-consensual spoken word album, and Rodri Primrose.
I feel like some people are maybe playing to our new captain's preferences in some of these names. It's fine. I think
I entirely
totally
support it. Absolutely entirely support it.
We're finding out who the Boimlers are in our crew. It's fine. All right.
The next question is yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Michael Colin asks, when a story takes place in the distant future, people like when it references other stories. There seems to be some criticism when the story references things contemporary to us. Have you seen this criticism? Do you get it? Do you agree with it?
I have seen that criticism. I think I get it, and I generally don't agree with it. The caveat to that being, I feel like it's got to make sense. It's got to be a reference that makes sense in the course of the story. It's the same way that I feel about fan service, right? Like, I'm not opposed to fan service, but there's got to be, like, it's got to make sense for reasons other than that. And so, you know, for example, if like in the next season of Star Trek Discovery, they're dealing with a planet-wide pandemic and they happen to mention COVID, okay, that makes sense. You know, but for example, in the first season when they're talking about these like future visionaries and they're like Zefram Cochrane, Elon Musk, et cetera, like I would love to just appeal back to the fact that the captain who says that turns out to be a mirror universe and evil villain person. But I also am pretty positive that's not what the writer's intent was. And in that scene, I just like, I don't know that entirely made sense to me there, especially given that Elon Musk was a reference. And that, like, it's a thing that Star Trek does, right? Well, they'll make like
that, yeah. 2
in-universe references and 1 real-life reference that makes you be like, oh, okay, I get what those other people have done now.
Right. Yeah, I do like versions of that, you know, the Book of Kor that, you know, is basically just Gilgamesh or something, right? Like,
right.
Those can be fun. I do think there are a couple different versions of this, right? There's the one that's like, you know, a star-crossed lover's story or something, and it's not Romeo and Juliet exactly, but it's using the kind of same archetypes that you're going to see pretty much everywhere. That seems unavoidable. And then you have like what you're saying, where it's like, it's a reference, but they earn it, right? And I think you really do, you know, it is like a joke. You have to earn it, right? It has to be a plausible explanation for why it's being used, or you have to like tweak it in some kinds of ways. So for example, I think it was actually in the Children of Time series that we're working on together, there was some stuff about like a game that was, I think, a reference to like Mancala or something, like a evolved version of an older game kind of thing. I like those. But yeah, I think, you know, just throwing it in there for, you know, current cultural reference is always sort of very hack and obvious, I think.
Yep, I agree.
One of the best versions of this, if people are interested, it's called Mr. Burns: A Post-Electric Play. It's a 3-act play about a dystopian future in which like all of the media that survived is centered around Simpsons episodes, and it's like each iteration, each chapter is like further into the future, and you see the evolution of the like memes around the Simpsons, and the last act is like a musical based on it, you know, a Simpsons episode. It's very good. It's a very, very clever idea, and I think it sort of conveys what you should be hoping for, which is the kind of evolution of a story or reference or something.
Yeah.
It shouldn't feel like it's, you know, the joke is a reference to yesterday.
Right.
All right. I think we made it.
That was like the one question that, a very good and important question, but one that I feel like I actually had a pretty succinct answer to.
Hey, it's okay to have succinct answers sometimes. You don't have to monologue just because it's a philosophy show. It's totally fine.
It's a lesson I'm learning, and I'm grateful for it.
It's okay. It's okay. You know, it's a little verbal diarrhea is expected at the beginning of the process. But no, we got through. Thank you so much, all listeners and patrons. If you would like to hear a few extra bonus questions, come over and join us in the After Dark.
These are all the questions that you have to like ask for permission to ask.
Yes,
like,
that's right. These are.
Bar. Is it cool if I ask you this?
Oh, it was a different conversation that I was thinking about when we were talking about asking permission there. I was thinking a different kind of asking, more of a mistress may I kind of. But yes, After Dark, come hang out, come be a patron, come join our pledge drive and help us construct pylons.
Thanks again to our listener units and patron units. Your support makes our internet broadcast possible. If you want to hear more from us, check out our other internet broadcasts, Queersplaining and Embrace the Void, as well as our wonderful editor Louisa Lyons Filmed Live Musicals podcast. Leave them all 5-star ratings and reviews on your podcast application. You can follow us on Twitter at 0gphilosophy or email us at philosophersinspace@gmail.com. If you want to support the show and get even more juicy sci-fi hot takes, consider joining the crew over at patreon.com/0g. Just $2 a month gets you early access to episodes and After Dark content. Until next time, friends, stay gooey.